the shareholder, so we can have those discussions with them.
So when would you have those discussions, if it comes to the fire?
When it comes to preparing budgets for us, or when it comes to them paying out their interim or final dividends. So they pay an interim dividend in about March of each year, and a final dividend that comes through in about October or November. So they're the discussions you could have. And we do have those discussions with the council does have the discussions with ACL on the dividend size.
Correct. Are there any more questions? Oh, Derek, how are you? Good to see you. Right, so no more questions. Oh, John, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just coming back to goodwill and the impairment of goodwill, and it gives us full details about how we assess any impairment goodwill, the same as recoverable amounts. All of the other policies say where there is a difference, particularly to the impairment of assets or something like that.
John, which page are you looking at?
Oh, sorry, page 62.
Okay, thank you.
Where there's an impairment to the value of assets, then any impairment or gain will be taken back through the P&L account. Yet there's no reflection of that as far as any changes in the value of goodwill. Should there be, or where does any change in the value of goodwill get reflected?
Through Mr. Chairman, I think the changes in goodwill goes through the P&L as well, I believe, but I'll need to check that. It doesn't specifically say that, but I believe that's where it gets treated.
That's what I would assume, but as I say, the policies are quite specific as far as changes to other assets concerned, but they don't actually state it in goodwill.
We could ask them to be more specific on where the goodwill impairment, if one occurs, is treated. So we could ask them to add to that goodwill clause that clarify how that would be treated.
Would you like to have that in, John, or?
Well, I think we've got it as far as other assets and liabilities are concerned, so it only makes it more complete if we have it as far as goodwill is concerned. So I think it's a good idea.
Yeah. You want to put a motion following that? You can make.
Through Mr. Chairman, I can simply take those views back to. I can take those views back to ACL and ask them to do that probably without a motion.
Okay. You happy with that, John? If we leave it like that. Okay. Yes, Paul. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Murray?
Oh, I was just going to ask a question. Sorry.
Yeah, you go for it. Yep.
No, I was going to go back to the dividend policy discussion. So maybe you want to close that one off first. And no?
Yeah. That's done.
Just in terms of the dividend policy, how involved is the conversation on the 50% of after-tax return? I mean, we could make $1,000 profit and it's 500, or we could make $1 million profit and it's 500,000. What's the? I guess it's a question for Paul in the first instance. What's the conversation between, and maybe council's involved, and I'm not because of my more limited role, but what's the council Ashburton contracting conversation around the strategy of what's looking to be achieved, the signalling for the organisation and for council in terms of how the two work together in terms of the sustainable dividend flow, if you like, because 50% could be anything from $1 to X million dollars depending on profit. So it was really just a understanding of what the strategy and philosophy is around that in a longer term sense.
Thank you for that. John, Paul, did you hear that?
Did you want me to answer that, or did Hamish want to answer that?
Either or.
Right, yeah.
Well, I can start. Generally speaking, it relates to the all the needs of the company. So we know they have capital expenditure needs around replacing plant and equipment, and we want to support them in having modern, efficient equipment. It will depend on the amount of the surplus or the profit as you infer. It can include our own budgetary pressures and what might be an appropriate support back from the company. So it's a round table kind of conversation around what's good for ACL and what's good for the shareholder. And in the end, the company tries to do the best thing by the company, taking into account those conversations. Does that sort of answer it?
Yeah, I think, and broadly speaking, it does. It's just, I guess I've seen examples where there's a floor on what's attempting to be paid each year, so the council knows what it's trying to, what it's looking to achieve as a minimum versus the contracting company and what they're looking to pay, just to put a bit of tension into it. And I think we might have had this conversation last year, and you might have a good reason for saying it. The 50% to me feels, I accept the spirit of the conversation with a 100% owned subsidiary, but 50% kind of feels a wee bit loose in terms of doesn't put any tension in terms of what the profit objective might be to get to a dividend back to council, because 50% is 50% of whatever the number is. So I was just sort of thinking about, how do you actually apply pressure? I guess that's a board of ACL type role, but how does the shareholder put a bit of tension into that conversation to get the best outcome?
And go to Hamish first and then Paul after, if you can.
Yep.
In the time I've been here, our experiences with ACL, perhaps I could reflect on two respects. One is their profitability very much reflects the market that they operate in. So they strive to maximise their profitability in the market conditions in which they operate. And we recall prior to COVID, when things had slowed right down and the future was so uncertain, they were talking to us about their concerns around profitability. Since then, the economy has done an about turn and operates in a very different way, and they talk quite openly with us around how the company is performing. So, and secondly, I guess the point is that they understand, they are a commercial board, and they understand the desirability of long-term sustainable profitability. So they are always trying to balance how much money they might make, what is available to their shareholder, and how they need to reinvest in the business so they can have an ongoing successful year. I don't know there's a lot more tension we can put into that relationship to demand greater profitability, if you like. The conversations are open. They report to the council on a quarterly basis. Now, the relationship is strong with their board and executive, and I think there is a very clear understanding that the company has of the shareholders' expectations around a sustainably profitable business.
I guess I'm just aware of an example where there is a minimum put into this sort of terminology such that at least the council's got a degree of certainty, and it puts a bit of a stick in front of the board to achieve a certain result. I accept it's a contracting business, but so is the other one I'm talking about, and I'm just wondering if that conversation has been had or whether it's not really the culture in which you want to operate.
Okay.
Well, I'm not sure we'd ever want to have a number such that they would borrow to pay a dividend, for example. So
then you would agree not to pay it. It's just really to set a bit of a target for them to aim at, and then the exception would be they come and have a conversation and you waive it for that year, rather than this feels a wee bit kind of loose comparatively. That was also the fallback position is there is a dividend to be paid of X, and you can almost contract out if it were, rather than the other way around.
Yeah, I just called to Paul. Paul, you've got anything to put in?
When we budget for the coming year, we always budget for a dividend for ACL, and they know what that is, because I generally tell them what we are actually budgeting.
Right.
So when they have their quarterly meetings, there's always a focus from the council side of early warning if that budgeted amount of dividend is at risk.
Right.
So we could formalise it more than that, but they generally know when we budget how much we're budgeting for, say, for next year from them.
So you're essentially saying you're doing what I'm asking, it's just it's not written down here.
Yeah.
It could be formalised more and we could actually every year when we do our budget, formally write to them and say we've we prepared our budget on the basis that we will receive X from you, instead of me just advising them verbally, because I'm not sure, I'm not sure how far up the company that goes, but they certainly, when we have our quarterly meetings, if the dividend's at risk, it's covered off because the councillors are always got their eye on that dividend.
Okay, well, I don't think it's for me to kind of say what it should look like. It's really just trying to provide some thoughts as to what goes on in some other places.
Are you quite happy the way we're doing it, or you want to have it more structured?
I'd be interested in councillors' thoughts rather than just me as an independent, because you understand the community and the culture of the...
Okay, we just go to John. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think as far as dividend policy is concerned, we always need to be aiming for something, and what we've got here is what I call an aim for. It's not necessarily what we're going to get, because I take into account two parts of what is said here: to maximising the long-term sustainable distribution flow to the shareholder. So that's the first thing that's got to be taken into account. And the second one is the last sentence: any distribution needs to be prudent in the circumstances and meet solvency tests. So to me, we've got protection in there as far as the dividend is concerned. So the only other way you could change it, and picking up on Murray's point, is that it's got to be 50% where the after-tax profit is a certain minimum figure type of thing. But I'm sure I look upon dividends as being part of CapEx, and what you pay as part of dividend is the same as what you're paying in new machinery and that sort of thing, although new machinery should be paid out of your depreciation and loan fund. So, as I say, I'm quite happy with the dividend policy, but I do pick up on Paul's point. Perhaps we do need to write to the board saying what we expect, rather than just doing it by word of mouth, and then we've got it, down in writing.
Okay. You want to make that a motion? Put it in motion?
Someone wants to put in
No,
Or Stuart?
well, I had a question and a comment.
Okay, we go to Stuart first and then we come back.
As long as the council appoints the directors of the company and the personnel represent mainly local people, I've got confidence that they will work for the benefit of the district as well as the council.
To be honest, I'm quite happy the way it's been discussed. I can hear all the sides, but I think what we've got at the moment seems to work for us. Is that the feel? Is it correct with all the councillors? Are similar? Liz?
Yeah, thank you. I'd agree. I think it's worked so far, and I'm happy with it.
Yes, it is. Thank you, Murray. It was a good discussion. Paul, you want to say anything about it?
When I go back to ACL on the other matter of goodwill, I might, with council's approval, raise this issue with them and say that possibly they could change the wording of that dividend statement to say, and endeavour to meet council's budgeted dividend amount for that year, or something like that. But I'll raise the issue with them and just say that it was discussed. That's okay. They may be able to come up with some wording themselves that might move that along.
Yeah. Thank you, Paul. Angus.
Mr. Chair, my question to you is, what is the meaning of formally in the number 2 part of the resolution where it says the council formally? What is the meaning taken from that word formally?
Paul, you want to say anything about it?
That really just means that we will write to them,
correct,
advising the ACL board of any comments that we've made, especially any requests for changes. But we'll formally put that in writing to them, that we've considered the SOI and this is the result of our consideration.
Thank you, Paul. Everyone happy and all councillors happy with what we're doing and discussing? Thank you. We've got a recommendation on page 46 that the Audit and Risk Committee received the Ashburton Contracting Limited 22-23 draft statement of intent and refers it to the Council for approval. Point 2, that Council formally advises the ACL Board of any comments on the draft statement of intent before the 28th of April 2022. We've got Stuart Overgett
I'll move both recommendations.
and John seconded. Yep. Everyone in favour, please say aye. Carried. Thank you all. This is the end of the open meeting. And we go to in public. Liz, you.